Welcome back to another episode of Buckle Up, an ultra running conversation with Simon and Brian. Simon, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm in Taper. I'm doing my first mountain race very soon, Bighorn 100, which is a race you did actually last year, right?
That's right. I did it in my redemption year, which was 2023. I completed it, and 10 years prior, 2013, I want to say, I DNF'd it. So I went back for redemption. Yeah.
Was it because your knees are doing better now?
My knees are doing better with age. That's correct.
That makes sense. Running makes your knee better and stronger. So, Brian, how are your knees right now this week?
My knees are good. I'm having fun. I'm enjoying the warmer weather here in Colorado. I'm getting it done. We got a little bit of time, a little padding, maybe 9.5 weeks until Leadville or so. So that's my next event. So you'll be coming through this neck of the woods, I believe, to get to Bighorn. Are you flying there?
I'm flying to Billing, Montana,
Mm-hmm.
and we drive from there, which is much closer than going to like Denver or something. That would be a
Mm-hmm.
big drive.
Yeah, that'd be great to hear all about your mountain adventures. Gosh, though, a taper, though? I mean, don't you just train right through? No?
I take taper and recovery very seriously. It's important for my knees, so you should do the same.
Yes, Simon, you're absolutely right. I should take my rest and recovery seriously. But I am really excited about our guest this evening. She is changing the game. She's breaking the rules. Nothing holds her back. She is making up the rules as we go, and I love it. And it's all in the right, perfect ways. This evening's guest is Candice Burt, Destination Trails, the Queen of 200s. She has created it all, the Triple Crown. She's got a new one out, the Arizona Monster 300. Yeah, I'm just super excited about this conversation we just had.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Actually, I don't know Candice so much personally. I only saw her once at Hurt, and she was running uphill at Hurt while I was walking downhill. But I think that's something that is really interesting is that Candice is the real deal, like you said, in the full deal. She is a great athlete and she does incredible things like FKTs and a lot of really challenging race. And her, of course, her world record or Guinness record of numbers of consecutive days with Ultra. But at the same time, a great organizer in terms of events. There's definitely have been a shift in terms of how races are in the US. And that's a big thanks to her organizing these 200 miler and then kind of bridging for me almost the world of the FKT and those very, very long distance and the world of racing and kind of having the in between through our event.
Yeah, she is reshaping the structure of Ultra, quite honestly. And we've been in the space about the same length. We both found Ultra running in about 2010 or so. But we met in 2017 in a week-long stage race across the Cocopelli Trail. And she turned me on that she was going to be creating an event in Moab, Utah, which we know now is the Moab 240. And I was sold on it instantly. And I've been a part of it, I think, ever since. I missed one year. I missed 2018, which was the snowpocalypse year. But 2017, I paced Michael McKnight for quite a bit of miles through the LaSalle Mountains. In 2019, I volunteered for my own aid station for 4 days at mile 220. 2020, COVID year, we still had the race, and I ran it my first time. 21, I was an aid station captain at Porcupine Rim, and 22, I raced it. And just last year, I volunteered the first 5 days at HQ headquarters and ran Geyser Pass aid station mile 200. As you can tell, I'm really vested in the Moab 240. I do have hopes and dreams of doing the Triple Crown, which we talked quite a bit about, and the creation of all those. But I'm hopeful, and she might tell us in this episode, but I'm hopeful that I'll do it when Tahoe becomes a circumnavigation of the lake again.
Yeah, which would make the adventure even better. I think one of the things that is unique with all of her race is that they're either point to point or it's not you're going around the same loop or something like that. So it's very much an adventure. And then Tahoe, doing the whole thing sounds honestly much cooler. So I think everyone's kind of waiting for that. Doesn't that the race experience is still fantastic. We had our friends Mark and Jan were both on the show before. Did it last year, 2023. Yes, so last year. So a really cool epic adventure.
Yeah, you're right. Her courses are non-repetitive, I think is the term. And so you're never doubling back on yourself or running the same constant loop over and over and over again. So you get a lot of scenery. You get a full experience from that type of format as well. And I really appreciate that about her events. I'm super pumped again for this conversation. She has been a game changer in our space. And here it is, guys, our conversation with Candice Burt. Welcome, Candice. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me.
You just traveled back to Colorado, I think I just saw recently, from Arizona. So welcome back to the state where I live as well.
Thank you. Yeah, just a short little trip in Arizona. Got a little heat, a little biking, so it was fun.
Excellent. Hey, I want to dive into how you found yourself in this space of ultra running. I'm pretty sure I know some of the logistics of it, but maybe our listeners would be really interested to hear how you found yourself where you're at. I mean, we all kind of know where you're at currently, but it's just the story behind it is kind of maybe lost in the wash a little bit. So maybe you mind sharing just a quick detail on how you got here?
Yeah. I could go way back to like my first ultra. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Sure. I mean, I believe that we have the same. I think we found ultra in the same year, roughly about 2009, and I think we both read a book called Born to Run, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I actually did my first ultra in 2010, so right around then, and Born to Run had come out around that time. I was in kind of a running group that would just do some trails, some road on Whidbey Island in Washington, and they were all doing the Orcas Island 25K, and I thought, well, I've done a marathon, like maybe I'll just do the 50K. It's only 5 more miles. Little did I know that trail running is totally different. But that I fell in love with it. I think it was so challenging and I was really sore. I just remember it felt like there was this cool community, and at that time I wasn't a part of it. My kids were really little, just a few years old, so it was hard to do a lot of running, but I definitely felt like I could, do those shorter ultras at that time. So I just, like a lot of us, I just jumped right in and I did what we had at the time in Washington was the Washington Ultra Series. And it was probably like 5 or 6 50Ks. And then it was a couple 50 milers. I did every race in it. And basically if you did every race and you were like pretty good, you could win the series. So I think, at that time I won the series, which isn't saying much. But I kind of enjoyed that competitiveness and felt like I was entering a new community, something that I had been missing, as a stay-at-home mom at the time. I was doing some massage. I just didn't have that community. So it just pulled me right in, and I haven't left since. That was 14 years ago. That was really the start.
Yeah, I love how it's so common that people will come into trail and ultra running for whatever reason, can be landscape, pushing their limit. But most people that stay at the end, you always talk about the community, you talk about the people, and then you try and you build something that is bigger. You try to leave the space even better than it was, which obviously you've done plenty. We're very grateful for that. So
oh, thanks. Yeah, I have contributed a bit. It made sense for me in my last line of work, massage therapy. I just wasn't as fulfilled, so I'd kind of been keeping my eye out for something, and it seemed like there was at that time there was certainly a lot of space for new events, especially short distance stuff. Well, and apparently long too. But I started
and very long.
Very long.
And
I
very,
started with
very long.
10Ks. The crazy thing is I started with like 10Ks and 20Ks. I would just like make up, it'd be like 15K or whatever the route was I wanted to make a little race on. And I had a club that, trail club in Bellingham. And we just had a lot of fun social things together. Yeah. And the Tahoe 200 just was like an idea in my head. And it was funny because all it took was, somebody being like, well, why don't you just do it? And I was like, oh, well, I guess I could try. That was 2014. So I started my races in 2012. So I just kind of jumped in.
Did you already run the 100-mile distance by 2012 in that first 2-year introduction to ultra?
Yeah, I did Cascade Crest. I believe it was 2011. And then in 2012, I kind of had a breakthrough. For me anyway, I thought it was a breakthrough performance. I ran the Tahoe Rim Trail in like 22 hours and 50 minutes and second place. And it was kind of unexpected. I wasn't surprised. I was trying to get under 24 hours, but I've been training really hard. So in my head, I was like, I thought I could win. But when I told some other people that, they're like, okay, because I hadn't done anything very fast. And I mean, it's not fast in terms of like a track event, but for a 100-miler, it was a good time. Yeah. My dogs are saying hi.
Just to touch on your dogs real quick, do you still have River?
Yeah.
I remember I remember the crazy eyes of River, and I met her in 2017 at Desert Rats, I believe, in the state line of Colorado here. Yeah.
I remember with that race, it was so hot, and we had an RV to kind of, my kids were there, and my boyfriend at the time, and the RV didn't have AC. I remember finishing one of the runs at Desert Rats, coming back to RV, and everybody was just laying like they were dead inside. It was like, it was hotter in the RV where everybody was hanging out. I'm like, what are you guys doing? There's like a river over there. And but yeah, the River, the dog, she was there. I think, was she the only one I had at that time, maybe? That was a while ago.
You might have had one of the littles with you too.
I have 4 now.
Oh.
Yeah.
Do you bring them to races?
Not so much. I usually get a house sitter, or my kids are, I know. Sometimes I'll bring Hank. My kids are older now, so often I'll go put on like the Tahoe 200 and they'll be here taking care of the dogs and doing stuff with their friends. So it's a little easier that way. I'm going to fly actually to the Tahoe 200, so no dogs coming, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a bummer. I mean, that's not always my excuse. At aid station, I go and I play with dog. I was like, I'm sorry, I can't just not play with the dogs. Like, I would run right now, but I'm just gonna play fetch with them. So, too bad. No excuse this year. Well, I'm not gonna be there at Tahoe, but yeah.
You'll have to keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah, not as long of a break at the aid stations.
Yeah. Especially for 200. I mean, you have to.
But
it's interesting. So you say it just came out like that to organize Tahoe 200, but I feel that the logistic or the complexity of an event like that sounds so much worse than a shorter race, than a 20K or whatever race you were doing back then. What made you make that jump instead of saying this is just crazy?
Yeah, I think it was my own interest in really long distance stuff. I had an attempt at doing the whole Tahoe Rim Trail, which was 170 miles. And I felt like people would be really interested in a 200-mile race, especially if it was traversing like a large span of trail, not just small loops, kind of a thing. So I really felt like it could be big. I just had a sense. And so I think part of what drove me was that all that, and then being naive to the amount of work and logistics and all that. Like, I think I just dove in so quick that I had to deal with all those factors. And I tend to do well when I do that. So rather than trying to think it all through first, I mean, it would have taken another 10 years if I had done that. I tend to jump straight in and have some confidence that I can make it work. And I was okay with it still being kind of a rough, like a more old school vibe, even if we only had like 2 cones at the finish. We had a blow up arch that year, so it's a little fancier than 2 cones. But it definitely was a very different event than we hold now. And every year, what I try to do is just improve from there, because we're not corporate. We don't have a bunch of sponsor money. So we try to invest every year in more supplies and better stoves. And we have these cool pizza ovens for some aid stations this year. So we've just kept upgrading things as we go. And I think that that's, as long as you're improving and upgrading and trying to be better every year, then people appreciate that. They notice.
Yeah, I mean, I bet you learned a lot. And I'd be curious, when you did it the first year, how big was the team compared to today?
Well, it was tiny. I mean, comparatively, certainly the number of people I could pay was only a couple people that first year. So it was all about getting my friends and any family I could to come help, and as many volunteers. But I mean, we probably had less than 100 volunteers. Now we have hundreds of volunteers, and there's a lot of paid people. And then I have 4 different employees that we pay year round just to keep everything with the events and the marketing and all that going. So it definitely requires, like, it's still a very small company, but it requires a lot of constant work. There's people that work full time year round on. You would think you could just like, oh, you put it on this year, like now you kind of know, but everything's always changing. The route changes slightly. There'll be big issues with permitting, and you have to be on it, because the last thing you want is to suddenly tell the runners the race isn't happening. That is unacceptable. So we're constantly working to be ahead of stuff like that. And when you have as many, right now we have 4 like super long distance events. It's definitely a handful, but we have an amazing team. So I feel really confident this is going to be the best year yet. I'm excited.
Candice, I think we're pretty, at least I'm familiar, obviously, with the 200s that you have, and then you have a new creation that we could talk about in a minute. But what else do you, I know you have other events as well, so you mind sharing what those are as well? Because I know you have quite a few races, but we kind of just talk about the 200s a lot, right?
Yeah, and there's only a few short distance races we're going to keep next year. So with the addition of the Monster 300, we're going to let some of our short distance races that we organized this year go. I think it's kind of, we're going to put all our eggs in that basket was the decision. So the team could just focus on doing them the best they can. But this year we had 3 different events that were like 50K, marathon, half marathon. But it's just not where like our passion or our skill, like I believe we do the 200 plus mile distance really well. And the shorter stuff, the passion just isn't there anymore. So what I've tried to do is be aware of that and be open to like what the rest of my team is capable, or like what works for them. Because I don't want their job to ever be like just constant work, or I want them to be able to run and have fun. And if they're working on too many events, then they won't love their job. So there's a balance, it should be a great benefit to work for a company, I think, in this industry. That's a goal anyway. So we're going to let those events go next year. But we'll still have a 40
yeah.
mile and a 20 mile at Bigfoot will be the plan, because that makes sense.
Was Orcus the one that you're referencing?
Well, yeah, Orcus, we had a 50-mile marathon and half, and then Deception Pass has a marathon and half, and Fragrance Lake has a 50K, half, and 10K. So, I mean, it's a lot of extra work for the team. A lot of travel, 3 different events, at least a week on site for each. So I think it makes sense. With the Monster being in April, that cuts right into that season too. So we'll see how next year goes. We could always bring them back if we have the time. But I think we're just going to go full in, just 200s and 300s. That's a plan.
I'm kind of seeing a trend here, Candice, and just maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of said like Tahoe, the origins of it in 2012 was like someone just maybe needed to twist your arm or say go for it, and you kind of went for it. But I also think that kind of leans towards the way you run and race yourself as well. You know, you're like, you just set this monster goal and you just like figure out a way to get it done, or at least challenge yourself in it, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like my own athletic endeavors, I tend to just jump in, which means sometimes I'm successful and sometimes I'm not. For the line of work I'm in, I don't necessarily like to plan a lot in advance. I love it when my calendar just looks really open and then I can just go whatever I feel like. So that's when I did the ultra marathon a day for 200 days. I kind of just jumped into that and made it work. But that's why it's really good. Like my team at Destination Trail is better at planning all that, the details than I am, or they enjoy it more than I do. So, because when you organize events, you can't just be like, oh, today I feel like working on it. So, yeah, you got to know what your strengths and weaknesses are for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I'm in a totally different line of work, but you have to understand who's on the team and what's their strength. And you definitely have people that will be a little bit more free-spirited. And you need people like that, people that are creative and passionate. And then you need someone to say, hey, like we have a meeting at 1:00 and this is happening. So structuring things a little bit. And I think it sounds like you have a really good team that is helping you create or run these events efficiently, because you're right. I mean, you're known in the sport for the 200s. You're changing the landscape of the whole ultra running scene. And I think for me, so I thought that's where Brian was going, is I see also a connection between doing FKTs and running 200s and 300s. And of course, FKTs will be more for fast runner like you. And for people like me, it would be to do a very long run by myself. But a 200 is a way to do that support. And I think you're making the FKT without being the actual fastest accessible to people, which I think is fantastic. So.
Yeah, you're right. I do think that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that, but I have been inspired by like the FKT style stuff for a long time now. And I think that for me, I'm a very competitive person, but I also recognize that people don't just want a competitive race atmosphere. They want the community. They want an event where they can explore and have an adventure and eat a lot of food, a lot of good food. And so focusing too much on like the elite field or how fast the runners are, how fast they can race, or just focusing a lot on that has never been very much of an interest to me. Even though I like to race myself for my events, I think that it's more valuable to focus on middle and back of the pack. Of course, if you want to come race and do it as fast as you can, we're there for you too. But if it caters to, that back of the pack, I think that's where the adventure is. Those folks are having probably a little more fun taking their time. So,
I can guarantee you that it's so much more fun. We've only met once on trail, and you were running uphill at Hurt while I was walking downhill. And I was like, it looks painful, and I'm just gonna walk slowly to the aid station. I'm so happy. I was like, poor Candice. It looks like bad.
Well, so this year, it was hard to race it hard. but fun in its own way. But the year before, when I was doing Ultra Day, I got kind of that vibe. Yeah, I took it easier. I just went for the finish, and I got to eat as much food as I wanted and talk to people. I loved it. So there's always that, even for the elite runner or whatever, at some point, you're going to have to race a race for the experience. You can't always win, or you can't always place. And so I think I'm able to go into that mode if that's what happens in the race or what the focus is. But it's taken a while. A little competitive.
Candice, you came out with the Tahoe in 2012. When did Bigfoot come onto the scene? I'm sorry.
So Tahoe, I kind of revealed it in 2013, and then the first year was 2014. So I brought Bigfoot on in 2015. It was just like that, because what I realized is we had this huge wait list. People were really interested in Tahoe even that first year. And I thought, okay, I could do this, because I was putting on a bunch of short races, but I was barely making it by. And I had to, even to put on the Tahoe 200, I had to borrow a bunch of money from my brother. I was like, I can't pay my rent or the race bills. And we didn't have any of our own supplies. So I thought, you know what, if I create another 200, maybe I'll be able to fund like these races or pay my rent. My rent was like $850 a month. It was scary. I was like, it's so much money. And and so I was just like, all right, I'm going to launch another 200. And I just made it happen in like a couple months. I was like, okay, the course kept changing over the course of that year to get something that was permittable. And it ended up being an amazing route, like from Mount St. Helens through the Cascade Mountains, to finish in just this tiny little town in Randall, Washington, where you would drive through and you might not know it was a town because there's like one gas station, one restaurant, and then kind of like a grocery store. We'll call it a grocery store. It's small, but it's a great little town. I mean, it's like right there in the mountains. It's amazing.
Was the vision ever for the Triple Crown, or did that just kind of come on board like organically as the 200s grew those first 2 years, and then 17, or at least I know you were planning it prior to, but 17 came online with Moab 240. Was it organic, or was that the end goal, or was that one of the goals?
It was not a goal. In fact, what I had originally done, it was sometime around after I created Bigfoot, there were a couple other race directors that are like, oh, 200s. And they launched, there was a Colorado 200 at that time, right after I think I did Bigfoot. And then an Arizona 200, different race directors. And I thought, oh, we could do a Grand Slam. So we actually put together a Grand Slam. I worked with those race directors to have it. And then the Arizona race ended up not happening. And so it kind of fell apart. And the Colorado race happened for a few years. So I kind of, at the time when I launched that with the other race directors, I had a friend, she goes, you're organizing 4 200s? And I was like, are you crazy? I would never, no. And so the funny thing is, here I am with 3 200s and 1 300. So it might be her fault. She planted the seed, but I liked the idea of having some kind of series. I used to have a series with short distance events, and because I think it's a fun way for runners to get to know each other, have a bigger challenge like the Grand Slam 100s. And so it's kind of inspired by that a little bit, but its own category. So, and it's been a huge success. We had 70 people sign up for the Triple Crown this year, which is the most ever. It's pretty cool.
70.
70. Yeah, 70
wow.
People.
Yeah.
So I know a day before closing, you had 4 spots left. Did those 4 spots fill?
Yeah, they did. It was pretty cool.
Geez.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I was like, all right, we did it. Yeah, it was amazing. And the Arizona Monster sold out in a week, which honestly, I was like, it could, but it might not. I don't know what's gonna happen.
Well, there's this weird phenomena with these things, right? Like the wait list, and you announce it pretty early, right? And the wait list just kind of fills, not the wait list, but the list sign up rise very quickly, and then people's like, oh no, I'm gonna miss it, and that's gonna be the next big event, and like people jump in. I have no clue how deep on the wait list I am, but I'm not gonna book PT. Well, yeah, I'm pretty deep, I think, so I don't think that's happening, but yeah, it's gonna be the big event next year, I think. Everyone is curious about it for so many reasons. So
I'm so excited because I put so much time in, and I lived in that part of Arizona, and I was so afraid that if I created another 200 or a 300, all I would end up doing is taking people out of the other 200s and just making more work for myself. I thought, like, if we have fewer people in the 200s and then fill a 300, it's like now I've got a whole nother, huge amount of work to do. But I think we just got to this point where people wanted kind of the next thing. And I couldn't, the creative part of me just really wanted, like, let's just launch this, let's take a risk and see how it goes. And it was amazing. I was actually on the trail, running the Arizona Trail, and I let Garrett he's like, I can handle it, and he ran the whole registration. I got this text when I got slightly into reception. I think he was like, we got 200 people, it's been 30 minutes. I was like, it's happening. So it's cool. Very cool.
There is this crazy feeding frenzy because Cocodona sold out with it. Yeah, sold out really fast too in 2 weeks. And this year, I signed up for Cocodona 2024, cool. Which just happened. I signed up 3 months ago, and it sold out in 2 weeks for 2025. So there's this huge feeding frenzy on the 200 plus in general, and
yeah. And I think timing is perfect, right? Like I think you were really smart about doing that in April. So it's kind of kicking off the season a little bit. And a lot of people are thinking, hey, I'm going to do Arizona Monster, Cocodona, and then they might do the Triple Crown. And like that's they're going to kind of match.
They're going to do 5 events. There's a lot of people doing that. I'm not sure how many. We went back and forth about making it a Grand Slam again. It's hard because it's like I go kind of back and forth. I'd be curious what your guys' opinion is. Because I think the triple is really cool, and if we do a Grand Slam, I think it's too much to do both. So we have to play that.
It needs to be one of the two, and I think for me, like the what I preach to people is, and I don't apply it to myself, but you have to be balanced a little bit, and there's definitely a risk of injury at some point when you do 5 races like that in a single year. So it's kind of scary, and you always have to wonder if someone gets injured because you motivated them to do something crazy, like how accountable or responsible are you for that? So doing all 5 it's a lot. It's just a lot.
Yeah.
But people will do it anyway, right?
And I think I'll take the other approach. Actually, I'll say I want it to be a Grand Slam of destination trail races. All 4 of them, one bucket, put them all in there. Let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, we might have to move it to that. I know I think there's going to end up being a lot of demand. We'll play out this year and kind of see how it goes. What people want, we can do. That's kind of what we go by too, and when people give us feedback, we try to shift, because really what we're doing is we're doing these races for runners. So, if people want a Grand Slam, especially if the Monster is something that ends up selling out fast and you can't get into that and you want to do the Grand Slam, then one of the nice things about the separate sign-up is it allows people to get into all those races in one sign-up rather than having to get through 4 lotteries. That's no fun. Nobody likes lotteries, suck, but that way... I mean, it's nice. On our side, we can at least make sure the volunteers get in, and we have a little bit of time to go through the applications and stuff. So it makes it a little easier on our side, but complicated.
Actually, let's talk about that for a quick second. I have a lot of experience volunteering at Moab for you guys, and I love running the main station. I really enjoy it. It's kind of like the highlight of my October when I'm not running the event opposite.
Yeah, one or the other.
So that's pretty nice too, and I enjoy that. And so I will be at the Monster as a volunteer for next year. I haven't obviously emailed Brian or anybody just yet, but I'll be there for sure.
I'm
but
taking
in short
notes
order,
right now. You're
sending Brian the email.
In 2 minutes.
I'll reach out to you, Brian. I promise. But where I was going with it is that it's one of the ways, thinking of the lottery system and how annoying they are, that we both agree that they are annoying, or all three of us could agree that a lottery is annoying. There is kind of a way to beat the lottery, right? How is that?
Well, you can come out and volunteer in an event. And I mean, I think it's a great way too, because you learn about the event itself, you'll know what food's going to be there. And then you also see like that behind the scenes. And I think it gives people a lot of understanding of how much work and effort and cost goes into it. Because I don't think I've ever heard a volunteer not say like, wow, this is way more than I thought was going on behind the scenes. It is, it's kind of crazy extensive, and the amount of food, and there's refrigerator trucks, deliveries, it's wild. But yeah, coming out and volunteering also gives you it gives you this inside view. But then you also get to make friends that you might not otherwise make, and you spend time with people in a way almost like the race, but without that pressure of time in the same sense. So I know of course, I'm organizing the event, but for me, I've made some amazing friendships through these events or through volunteering at other people's events. And I think that we should, as runners, think about always giving back a little in that way, because I don't think any race could happen without a certain amount of volunteering. I mean, as a race organization, we can't really get sponsors, so we do have to pay the bills with race entries. And if we didn't have volunteers, the entry fee would be insane. So it is kind of this thing where it's an interesting industry, but it is made possible not just by like my organization, but by people like you, both of you, who come out and put a little time and love into it. And I really believe that like people's view and love of an event has a lot more to do with the volunteers who are at that aid station making it special, and like sometimes giving runners underwear like off their own body or like something crazy like that. There's all kinds of stories, but it's that giving nature of most of the folks who come out here that make all these events special, no matter who the organizers are. And that's important to remember. But yeah, we're super grateful for that piece. So if people want to come out and help, we always want to give back. And our volunteer swag is getting better and better every year. So there's that too.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think it's pretty clear that if you had to pay all of the volunteer, which then would not be volunteer, none of the events could happen. So I think it's a sport that relies a lot on people. You get a lot of running these events, and then you need to find ways to give back. And it can be volunteering at race, but it can be maintaining the trails. It could be even, I mean, yourself, even though you're getting paid through organizing these races, you're giving back to the community by creating events by a runner for runners. So I think there's different approach to doing that. And I think that's great. The only time I ever got pissed off at another runner was someone who told me that he avoids any race that asks for a volunteer requirement, like trail work. And I was like, you run ahead. I don't want to hang out with you. I love everyone, but you're really a selfish asshole right now. Because none of that would be possible. I mean, even just the trail wouldn't exist. It's not profitable to maintain the trail. So you have to have people that go out there and give their time. So
yeah, absolutely. And really like through those requirements, because I've had races require me to do trail work. I'm so busy that a lot of times I won't find myself doing that unless it's a requirement. I love that Hurt does that too. And I never have regretted like going out and spending that time on the trail and meeting those people. The people organizing the trail work are so committed. In Arizona, on the Arizona Trail, there's individuals who they get to like kind of own their section of trail, and they organize trail work and they go out there and hike it, and you can feel like the love and attention that that trail has gotten through those people. But like you said, we wouldn't have races if we didn't have people like that, or if we trail runners didn't help out. And I do think that it's important. We need to step up as trail runners and do our part. For sure.
Yeah, which is all fostering, I think, a positive community. There's different ways to do that, but yeah, giving back, being nice to people. I mean, the little things just create something that the atmosphere is not selfish and about it's me, and I'm the runner, I'm the most important person, but rather it's a community thing. And even just the way, you know, volunteers are treating you as a runner, you need to think when you're the runner, how do you treat volunteers? And if you're an asshole to volunteers, then volunteers won't want to volunteer, and then you don't have volunteers, and it's just kind of a cycle. And I think the sport has done a very good job in general, or the community has done a very good job at being positive. So
it's so unusual to have somebody be rude to volunteers. If it happens at my race, there's consequences too, to whether it's a runner's crew or the runner. There was a guy last year that was really rude to actually one of my staff at the finish line. He was mad that the sweepers hadn't grabbed a phone that he left by mistake on the trail. I don't know how out of it he was, sleep deprivation. I'm like, really? They probably didn't see it. And he was yelling at this staff, and I said, "Who's your runner?" And then he realized, he was like, "Oh my gosh." I'm like, who are you crewing out here? Or pacing. And then he was like, "Oh, no, I'm so sorry." You know, so he ended up apologizing because he didn't want to get his runner in trouble. But, you know, having that kind of attitude, it's not good. And it's very unusual, thankfully. I rarely see it, but there's always there's consequences if you act like that at my events.
It is pretty rare. I have volunteered, I think, at Moab, I think 3 years, 8-station style, other events all over the West in different roles as a volunteer. And I can't remember anyone actually being an asshole to me, quite honestly, which just speaks volumes to our community and how supportive it is. I like volunteering. I feel like volunteering is like the trail community without the running. It's kind of nice, actually. Sometimes I don't have to run, but I still get all the vibes of the trail community. And when I am running the event, I don't really get to see the front of the action, like the race part of it and the hype talk. And I just kind of stay in the back or the middle of the pack where I'm at, and I just do my thing and get through the day. So when I'm volunteering, I get to see the front action and, get to talk strategy. Oh, you think he's going to pass so-and-so, and so-and-so is going to get so-and-so. So it's kind of nice to have that feeling at the race as well.
Yeah, that is cool to see kind of that flow happen. And have you learned a little bit for your own strategy that way, or do you think that, especially with a 200-mile distance, I feel like there's so much to learn when you're on the volunteer or the organizing side. You do get to see certain mistakes happen over and over too.
For sure, definitely. And I in my coaching business, I have people that come in. Are doing your races or doing 200-mile distances. And I tell them exactly what you just told us a few minutes ago. So go out and volunteer at a 200. You'll see, and volunteer specifically at an aid station that's later in the event, 140 miles or plus if you could get to that later aid station and really see what they look like and how they're moving, what they're eating, what they're wearing as gear, what's working for them, because they've probably figured it out in 140 miles already. If the gear is working or not. And so, yes, I have firsthand experienced just more knowledge by being there every year or every other year. And I suggest my athletes do the same thing. I think it's part of the process as well. I mean, like just really being there firsthand and seeing it all.
So much more to that, like that taking that action, actually being there than, listening to a bunch of informational podcasts about it even, or no offense guys, but you know what I mean? Like actually going and being there and immersing yourself in. I think sometimes we can separate ourselves a little when something's new from the actual experience. Like, oh, what do I need to know to do this? Well, try it out and learn the hard way. You'll learn. You'll learn it well if you jump in or volunteer.
And I mean, maybe to date myself a little bit, I think I got that from Lance Armstrong, if I'm not mistaken, and not that he's a well liked household name, but
Yeah.
when he was winning Tour de France and when he was doing all those things, he was a scout. He would go out and know every section of every route in the Tour de France, and he obviously would go win and dominate, and the team would win and dominate for whatever reason, whether he was fit or not. But either way. So I got that from him. And when I started doing Ironmans, I did Ironman Arizona, and I volunteered one year at Ironman Arizona. Did the same thing. I wanted to see what bikes they were using, what wetsuits they were using, what road sneakers they were running in. I wanted to feel the concrete at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, to feel how hot it was going to be in Arizona in the middle of April. And so so I think I've carried that over to Ultra the World, into the 200s as well. It was the first thing. As soon as you said that the 2017 Moab 240 was out, I actually didn't volunteer. I helped out Mike McKnight that year. But
Cool.
I got eyes on the course, right? I got eyes on the course. I wanted to see what this was about and where it's going. And I also think that's my approach for the Monster 300, quite honestly, is I want to see it firsthand. I want to see it play out. I want to see the terrain and get the feel for it before I step myself into that arena as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of unknown, especially with a first year event, right? Yeah, and we tried to make the cutoff. It was like, well, we can't just add a little bit. Like, we have to add more than the 200. So, but with a first year event, I well know, even without the best planning possible, there's things that we're going to learn that will make the next few years even better.
Yeah,
we'll do a great job next year, but first year events are special.
that's a nice way to say it.
There's a learning curve.
You'll do your best. How about that? I mean, the shittiest show I've seen in terms of 100, and it was actually a really good race, but they really messed up the cutoff, and I think it was 75% DNF rate, and these were good runners. It was rough, and
that's bad. Yeah,
it was not a new organization. They knew what they were doing, but they just got it wrong, and you never know. So, but
it can happen.
It's interesting because I think it's true. If I really care about a race, I'll go out there and I'll try to know as much as possible. There's something to be said about I have no clue what's going on. I've done races. I'm like, I know it's 100-mile. I know it's in Arizona. That's about it. And you just kind of go with the flow. Of course, I'm not going to win, but even if I prepared for it, I would not win. And then it's just, you ask at the volunteer, what's the mileage to next 8 stations? Like 15 miles. Like, oh, really? Okay. Good to know. And then you just go. But yeah, it's a huge advantage. I think also if you go in the later 8 station, you will see a lot of human or strength story of people really struggling and seeing what's going on in their head, and maybe you'll even be part of kind of pep talking them into, look, like, I know you're tired right now, how about this, eat something, drink something, sleep a little bit, and let's talk about it after all of that. Like, don't make a decision right now. Like, I have a nice burger for you right now, like, just eat the burger. And understanding how you can trick someone into thinking, I think I can make it to the next 8 station and then I'll drop. And then you just do that until the end. So
it works.
Could be a good way. It definitely works.
Yeah, I think that a lot of dropping out of races has to do with like thinking too far ahead, because it is completely overwhelming. And it almost doesn't, like, once you're at 100 miles plus, like, yeah, those mileages can be very overwhelming. And I know my experience finishing races, I can look back. I tell myself in the middle of it, how are you going to feel later, though? It's going to seem like it went by so fast later. Remember that. Put yourself in that mindset and just keep taking those steps. Like you said, go to the next aid station. And if you're not feeling it, eating more food is always the answer to getting that mental state back to a positive place.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, you're right. I think we get caught up in suffering for what's to come rather than like how you're actually feeling right now. And for me, definitely like Cocodona, what was the hardest was we were not even 100 miles in, and you're thinking, wow, like I have so much to go. Like this is, you can't even think about that. And physically, I was probably not at my worst yet, but mentally, I was really at the lowest of the low, thinking there, like you can't even comprehend. And your FKTs are like all of these longer. It's almost an abstract distance when you think too much about it. That's not just hours of suffering. That's not even days. That's weeks almost. And it's just,
it is
really,
yeah,
like it's crazy.
You really have to love it. And when it does get to a certain level of suffering, or degradation of spirit and body and all this, then yeah, sometimes it doesn't end up being a finish that you get. You just get the experience you get. And that's okay too. I mean, I think that runners should be easy on themselves in terms of like the decision that's made, move on from it, go on to the next thing, or go back to the event if you need to. But I always, I feel like some people are a little too hard on themselves when it doesn't work out exactly how they want. It's just a longer time frame that you have to think about. Again, it's kind of like the race. It's like the race just continues next year. Go back, sign up again, and tackle it again. If it was worth tackling once, there's something there to be learned. And we have to be gentle on ourselves in that learning process. It's not all about the finish. For sure. I mean, it's pretty nice to get to the finish, but it doesn't have to happen the same year that you start.
For sure. And I think, if it's kind of implied that if you push to your actual limit, sometimes you will fail or you will fall short of what were your goals, because your goal was very ambitious and it was not an easy goal to reach. And sometimes you will reach it, sometimes you won't. And I think accepting that is important to actually reach these ambitious goals.
Definitely. Yeah, it is. Not putting too much of our worth on the result. When we do that, it's not as much fun even to take those steps to that result. And I think that's something that I'm really trying to embody as I move forward in goals that I have, is making the process the most important thing, whether it's the process of training and getting the start line, but then, all those steps to the finish, if that's where I end up. And if I don't, then I'm going to still put everything in, all cards on the table. And if it doesn't end up being a finish, then so be it.
Candice, you have the Triple Crown. We're all anticipating the Monster 300. It's coming up, and it's going to be just exciting. Where do you see Destination Trails in 5-10 years? Where do you see ultra running in 5 to 10 years? Where are we going? Where do you think?
Whew. That's a great question. I think there are a few turns in the trail, so there's this trend that my company is like full on, like this is our thing, 200s beyond. So we're going to continue in that direction until we feel like, or unless we feel like something changes. So that is just the biggest interest of mine. Passion is there. And I believe that I'm seeing other races doing that. And I think last year was the first year I was like, whoa, there's more 200s. And they'll kind of, I think what'll end up happening is the quality will kind of rise up to the top, or the ones that get the most media, that tends to be, but that quality courses, all that'll rise up. And then there'll still be a lot of choices that may not have lotteries or all that. So I think people will have enough events to run, even if they don't get in the lotteries. That's going to be a whole trend. And I think you're going to see more race directors trying out even the 300-mile distance. I don't think that there's going to be a huge trend toward even further distances, because it's just getting to this, it'll get to this point where you can't really charge enough money to have enough people to support those really long distances. To me, 300 is kind of, it's that edge. You could go longer than 300, but I'm not sure how much more as a race organization, and actually control the course and keep the runners safe, all that. It would have to be a totally different kind of event. So if people end up creating events longer than, let's say, 400 miles and longer, I think what's going to end up happening is that it's going to be more self-supported. The thing that I talked to Buzz Burrell a little about this on a podcast, and what I said is, I think, if as a runner you have a real desire to do those longer distances, I think doing the FKTs, or you don't have to go for a time, you can do a route. And races aren't going to be able to permit events that are like point to point or single loop that are really much longer than what we're doing, without adding, I think, too much filler. So for me, that's, if a race has filler or too much road, I just won't do it. So we might get some that have that. I like what Laz did, where you're running across a whole state and it's just super low key. That's a cool setup. So there's options for people who want to go longer. But I just don't think there's enough demand that things are going to push much past 350. Then there's the trend toward hyper competitive, turning ultras like 100-mile races into very competitive events, like that influence of the Ironman, and those could grow and grow. So I think there's a kind of those two trends, and there's different kinds of people, so it's great that we have different options to do. I think, the more the better. Welcome it all, and that way runners who come in through the hyper competitive, a lot of media attention, so people hear about these races, UTMB, Western States, it filters them into like all these other like kind of weird niche races like mine, and so people have options. They always have options, and I think it's all good for the sport. There's going to be a lot more media too. I think, like, people creating small media companies like you see. It's great, all the podcasts. I think that trend is going to continue. Social media influencers doing all these kind of races, that's going to be bigger and bigger. You're seeing more and more of that. You almost know, like, the social media influencer runners more than who the fast people are now. It's like, I know who Andrew Glaze is, and like, he's funny and interesting. He's doing kind of a cool thing, and it's interesting how that trend has captivated so many people. And again, I think both is good. Like, I want to be inspired by people who are doing things really fast, but I'm also like really interested in those weird, like, oh, you're still running 100 miles a week. That's really interesting. It's kind of cool doing that with a full-time job. Like, it's interesting to me. I think it's interesting to the everyday runner to hear about those people.
Yeah, I think the trend there is that there's kind of a capped market of how many elite runner you can follow. It's great to see, the top 3 runner finish, but someone finishing 17 at UTMB, there's just not as much interest, because why don't you follow the number 1 runner? And then it falls to people that will do something that's a little bit more extraordinary, but in the more ordinary kind of way, like Andrew Glaze is doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm probably not using the right word, but I think there's a market there. I'm curious, because you mentioned there's definitely a lot of 200 popping out, and I think obviously some of them will die out. And I'm curious, did you see an impact of people like Courtney or even, man, I should not forget his name, ex-Navy SEAL, Goggin, like people like that going the Moab 240, like did that help the event kind of grow bigger, or you, like, it was already kind of growing and you didn't see a difference?
So I would say that the answer is yes, but with Courtney, she did Moab before she was really famous, and it helped launch her, because she ran it the year that Cam Hanes ran, and so Joe Rogan was following the race, and then he saw that this woman beat everybody, and he's like, oh, I got to have her on the podcast. So that really blew she would have continued obviously to rise in the sport of ultra running, but she's gained such like a global interest outside of that. I think because she is a really interesting, likable, cool person. But that like Joe Rogan effect podcast thing was huge for her. This is my take, you know, I could be wrong, but from what I saw, I didn't know who she was before Moab. And somebody said, oh, the girl who won, it was, she'd gone blind near the end of, what's that race?
Run Rabbit Run, I think.
Run Rabbit
Run. Yeah. So I heard about that, and somebody's like, "Oh, that girl's running Moab," and I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." And then I saw we were sponsored by Solomon at the time, and so she had one of the sponsor entries, and I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll keep an eye on her." And she just, you know, continued to blow up in a beautiful way, like, you know, way after that. So I had reached out to David Goggins and Cam Hanes in the first place as people that I thought would kind of bring some attention to the events. And I've reached out to a lot more people than that, but there's some of the bigger names that were like, oh yeah, we'd love to do the race. And that absolutely had an effect because Moab is by far has the most demand of any of our races. And I think Tahoe 200 should be that race, honestly, because to me, it's always been like the Western states of 200s. It's in Tahoe. It's beautiful, smooth, like mostly single track. You circumnavigate the whole lake. It's just classic. But that race has gotten hit. We got hit by COVID cancellation, and then we had the Caldor fire stuff that we're still dealing with. And so, unfortunately, Moab has never been canceled. We were able to hold it in 2020, so it just started rising up for various reasons. But that's kind of what happened there. Tahoe will come back, though. It will be still going to be the Western states of 200.
But it's sold out, right? I mean, yeah. Okay, so
yeah,
that's fine.
It is. But like for me, we're still having to do this Caldor fire route, and I want to go back to the full lake circumnavigation, and fingers crossed that's going to happen next year. We won't know till the fall, but it's driving me nuts because I created this course and it is not supposed to have out and backs, so we're making it work, and it's still really beautiful as it is, but I'm ready to go back.
I mean, for what it's worth, I know more than one runner that said they're just waiting for that. So
yeah.
That one of them is me. That's a great point of contention because I do want to bring up the fact that your 200s plus are typically like looped courses. It very rare do they have overlap or out and back sections on them. I think Bigfoot does have a little bit in it, if I'm not mistaken. But Moab is a complete loop.
Out and back would be like leaving the trail to go down to an aid station.
Oh, okay. It's a point to point. It's a point to point.
It's point to point. So we either do point to point or single loop, and Tahoe's the only exception because of the Caldor fire closures right now. Yeah, and it's temporary.
Yeah. But I think on that whole thread of like 200s and where it's going and the 5-10 year outlook that you're just guessing at. I mean, I know we'd all be guessing if we had all our own opinions in here. But I also think that that's a point of clarification, is that your races are single loops or or point to point, and there's no repetitiveness in it. Whereas there might be a 300 miler or a 400 miler that could be, the 50-mile loop done, I don't know, 8 times or whatever that is, right? So there are other options for race organizers to do, but you are pretty specific on your concept of non-repetitive races or non-repetitive course.
That's very important to me. And I think that you'll see that if organizations don't do that with these really long events, one, runners aren't going to want to pay those prices because you want an experience. So if somebody comes along and they're doing 10, 20, 50-mile loops, if they don't charge less, they're not going to buy it. I guarantee you. So it's kind of like, and they shouldn't, because it's more expensive to organize point to point or single loops. So I think that as athletes and participants, we should look carefully at courses and make sure that we're getting, what we want with our entries and our training and if you're going to invest in an event, make sure that look at the courses and all that before you do. Because there's a few I looked at and I was like, oh, dang, because I would like to do some too. Doing my own is hard, but I'm looking at other races to do, and it's hard to find really cool courses still, but there's definitely some out there, it seems like.
I mean, I think the course is a big one that people will always talk about, but there's also the vibe, the quality of it's so much more than that. And for example, you do hurt. I can't remember how many times, but you did quite a lot of time, and it's 6 miles in the end that we actually end up kind of doing in every possible direction. But it is still a really, really, really good race that is beautifully organized. It has a great vibe, and for me, that's one of my favorite race. And the trail is cool, but you don't need to run 100-mile to see that trail. So I think there's a lot of component, and it seems that you're able at Destination Trail to have all of these and these complex events where it's a point-to-point or big-ass loop, which is absolutely amazing. One question that I have with all of these things, though, is do you see a push or a trend towards more agglomerate of race organization instead of having a one-off or two-off race kind of regroupment? And do you feel even yourself pressure because you're not the smallest, but you're also not the biggest fish in the pond? There's definitely, there's a trend where you're going to be more profitable if you have 50 race because you'll be able to have people that are full time, and you have more than one race. There's an organization, it's just that one race, and I'm sure they're not super profitable. So do you feel a pressure to either grow yourself or a pressure by bigger company that they would want to kind of work with you?
I don't have interest in necessarily either direction. At least right now, I feel really happy with the amount that we organize. I think it comes down to, I want to be able to do the things that I love, so I don't want to work too much. That's a balance for me. So I don't need to take over the world. I want to do what I do well. And if that means just holding 4 events, I've found I have an ability to do that and still keep people full time and keep them year after year. So I learned after probably 5, 6, 7 years into this business, I learned you need to find a way as an organizer, if you want to do this full time, to keep people full time that can help you. And that meant paying people bigger salaries so that they didn't have to do 2 or 3 jobs. So we made that leap, and, it meant having less profit, but having the security and bringing people into that fold of, we're in this together. Because I don't personally want to organize my events by myself. I like organizing them with the people I work with. That's part of why I love it. But I don't feel the need to continue to grow, at least at this point. And I'm not the kind of person who would want to sell out to a bigger company or partner with somebody else. I like to be able to make the overall decision myself. The people who work for me make those decisions with me. But having somebody else owning part of the company wouldn't work for me. I wouldn't go there. So I think these will always stay probably a certain amount of old school, I think.
Cool. I like that.
Yeah. We have our own thing. I do see some other companies possibly growing and growing. And again, I think that'll be good for the sport. But as a human being, I don't want to work that much. I like to get out and run. So if what I'm doing allows me to run more, then I'm happy.
Yeah, I mean, to some point, it could be, for example, Do you have live stream? I should know that, but I don't. Do you have
Yeah,
live stream for your
we toured
events?
around with it a little bit just at the finish line. We would like to add a little bit of more of that. Yeah, it is something that we're exploring and can hopefully add more of. And like Aravaipa's really nailed it for a company that it's trying to cover so much distance. Like let's say with Cocodona, they did from what I heard anyway, like a good job of kind of covering stuff, even though it's really hard to do. And we will not be at that level, but we're definitely interested in stepping up our game a bit. Izzy started working for us this year, and she will probably, it sounds like we'll take her on more even than we are this year, and she can help, I think, us add that and bring people on. But yeah, as individuals delve into that and create companies that do that for companies like mine, I think it'll be easier for us to cover it. I just don't want to become a live stream company, but I would hire somebody to come in and help us with that.
I think it's kind of a fragmentation because right now you're vertically integrated. You do the whole thing related to the event, but eventually you could have a media company that just covers the big race, and your race will be part of what they're covering, and there's going to be an exchange of money, but that helps you grow, that creates visibility and a buzz around the race, which is always helpful to have a flow. Yeah, I
think that's important. That's why Cocodona is selling out. That's huge. It's very smart. It's definitely another direction that races are going, and a lot of races just won't be able to add it for various reasons. But we would, if anybody out there has a company like that, reach out, and we're interested. We're interested in hiring you, possibly.
Candice, I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit, right? So Cocodona had a lot of good coverage, and they did sell out in 2 weeks, but the Monster 300 sold out as well. So, like, you got to take credit where it's due. So in 1 week, so there you go, even better. Hey, we know a little bit about what's going on with Destination Trails. It sounds like you're kind of hyper-focusing on the longer distance stuff in the future. What about you, Candice Burt? What's in your future in the next few years? I know you have some things coming up, some foot issues that you have to deal with, and you just had a bad crash on your bike that you're healing from as well. So I know you're going to be a little bit out for a bit, but what about the long-term plan for Candice Burt? What's on your radar?
Yeah, so like you said, I have a fractured pelvis and wrist, but thankfully the fractures aren't like detached from the bone, or for the pelvis, I can still weight bear as pain allows. So I'm back riding, and I'm trying to be careful, but I appear online to be just like a cyclist right now because unfortunately I can't run. It's still not, it's too painful. But then I also, on top of it, have this foot issue. I'm going to get surgery hopefully this month or early next month, and then just take myself out of the rest of the season probably. But I am going to do Hurt. I'm going to do it. Even if I have to hike the whole thing, I'm going to do it. Because I think it'll be my eighth finish. And I got to get every finish I can at this point. I want to get 15. Cool. So
15.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm just going to keep going for it. Yeah. So
it's a tough one. Like for people that don't know, Hurt is not well, I mean, for someone like you, it's probably easy, but for someone, it was tough. I struggled. It's like you don't have that much buffer to just hang out. So
I mean, I've finished within like 2 or 3 hours of the cutoff, and that feels like, oh my God, like we gotta pick this thing up. I've had some pretty slow years, and I've had some fast years. So I know the suffering, and every year I've suffered out there. That's part of why I love Hurt is that course, man. It gets you every time. I go out there, I'm like, oh wow, this is really technical. And like you said, the community, I love the people. So I'll go out every year, they'll have me. But after that, I want to run a transcon. So I'd love to run across the US. I also got to finish the Arizona Trail. So those are the two really big on my list.
Jeez, they're giant, but they're awesome. I love it.
Big projects. Yeah, huge. Yeah. So we're going to fix this foot, and then the sky's the limit. That's a plan. That's right. But I'm excited. I'm actually very excited about the surgery because I've been trying to tweak my shoes. I've cut out shoes. I've stretched shoes out with shoe stretch. Like I'm like maxed out on what I can handle with just trying to change everything else to fit the foot. Is time to get it taken care of, for sure.
Yeah, knowing enough about you, Candice, I know that surgery is not an easy thing to think about, especially on your foot, on something that we use in our sport, in our space.
It's
so
scary,
much.
for sure.
Yeah, and so I'm sure you've weighed out all the other options prior to going into this as a last resort.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I went around to many different doctors, talked to them. I wanted to get kind of their idea of what surgery would be exactly, and then I compared them. And I found a doctor who's a runner, who works on athletes. And I feel really good he does these surgeries every week, and was actually recommended by another surgeon who was like, you run so much and your feet are so important. He said, I could do the surgery on you. He's like, but I don't want to, because I only do them every once in a while. And it's really important that you have somebody do it who just knows exactly, what he's doing. Now, even if somebody's not a runner, I'm like, still go to that person who does them every week. But that's the crazy thing is, like, if I was very clear with the doctors that this is my life, and it needs to be done as well as possible. And this one doctor that I settled on, he was the only doctor that didn't say you have to temper your expectations. He never said that. He had more confidence, and I think just because he does it so much. But I appreciated that. But it was quite a different. Everybody else I talked to was like, might or might not work, and I was like, geez, like, that's a lot to go through for you to tell me that you're not sure if this is going to work. So it's still, there's still risk, obviously, but I'm ready to take that adventure for whatever it's worth.
Well, I'm sure in your downtime you'll be planning all sorts of new events for destination trails and coming up with new maps and different routes all over different places and really scenic places. I want to be mindful of your time. I appreciate you coming on the show, and we wish you the best of success. We'll be rooting for all of the Tahoe 200s, all the Bigfoot 200s, all the Moab 240s. Actually, I'll be running this year. Awesome. All the Triple Crowners, and I will see you later this summer for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I head out to Tahoe next week. So, yeah, the season is like kicking off. But, yeah, thank you guys so much for having me on, and truly an honor. I so appreciate the invite. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Absolutely.
I'm Simon, and that's Brian.
We'd be thrilled to connect with you beyond our show.
For all of your endurance coaching requirement, you can reach out to Coach Brian at altitudeendurancecoaching.com.
To explore more of Simon's content, visit Running with Simon on YouTube.
Don't forget to rate, like, and share our content regularly.
Your support means a lot to us. Thanks.